Last month I released a 4-part series titled How to Catch Steelhead, where I went over my top 4 methods. If you want to watch from the beginning, I'll put a link to the playlist above. But this is a bonus episode where I'm going to cover some viewer questions from the previous videos. I'm going to add a few things I overlooked and a few things I learned along the way. So let's get started with some viewer questions. So we'll start out with some questions regarding float fishing with beads. Now my viewer Dan B always has some good points to make on the channel, as well as some good questions. Well, he asked when I'm going up in bead size, if I go up in weight size, and if I go down in leader length. Well, those are some good questions that I thought I kind of covered in the first bead fishing video, but I realized I didn't cover it quite as well as I thought. So I should start out by saying that the majority of time that I'm bead fishing, I'm using a Hawken AF6, which is a weighted float. I'm using the 1/4 ounce, which this also comes in an 1/8 ounce. Now, just so you understand, this is the same float as a BEADMASTER, just in case they don't have one or the other in stock. The print is just different. They're both weighted floats. Now, if you go up in size, you have to go to an AF5, which is an unweighted float, but they make those in 3/8, 1/2 ounce, and 5/8. So I'll kind of show you what those look like. This is a 3/8 in the high visibility. It's almost the same exact size as an AF6. And then here's a 1/2 ounce. So it's just maybe a little bit bigger, and again, it's non-weighted, but you would use a 1/2 ounce weight with this. Now, if you watched last year's video titled New Year's Day Steelhead, that was at the beginning of 2022. I started out fishing an AF6 and 1/4 ounce and quickly realized it wasn't getting down into the strike zone. So I changed up to a AF5 in the 1/2 ounce, using a 1/2 ounce stick weight, and I got 2 hookups after making that adjustment. So yes, you probably want to go up in weight if you're having trouble and you don't think you're getting down into the strike zone. So I've also got the question of how did I come up with a 30-inch leader length? Well, when I first started having success with beads, I kept those leaders and I measured them. 30 inches was the average, and so I just stuck with it. Now, if you want to go down in leader length when the water's really big, you can go down, let's say, to a 24-inch. I personally don't. I stick with the 30-inch. It has worked well for me. So while we're talking about higher water scenarios, it's the same thing with jig fishing. If you are fishing water that's a little bit higher than you're used to, I would go up to a 1/4 ounce jig, and you might have to go with a heavier float. Like just this last weekend, I was fishing an AF6 1/4 ounce, and I just matched it up with the 1/4 ounce Nightmare jig, and it matched up just perfectly. But you can also use an AF7. You can just use it without the weights, or you can even use, let's say, a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce and just use an inline weight. Like I've got some of Dave's inline weights. So let's say if you're using a 3/8 ounce float and you want to match a jig to this, you could put on a 1/4 ounce inline weight and just pair it up with an 1/8 ounce jig. 1/8 ounce and 1/4 ounce equals 3/8. So just another option when the water's a little bit higher than normal. So Dan also asked me about my thoughts on using mono over fluorocarbon for bumper material while you're float and bead fishing. Well, I'm of the opinion that monofilaments such as P-Line CXX and Maxima Ultra Green are stronger and more abrasion resistant than fluorocarbon in the same pound test. Fluorocarbon's benefit is it's nearly invisible underwater, so it's great for leader, but I don't think it has the same breaking strength as the same mono in, let's say, an Ultra Green. And I should mention that your bumper material doesn't need to be completely invisible like your leader. So I'm going to stick with Ultra Green. So lastly, Dan asked about ordering DRO beads online. Well, I reached out to DRO, Dylanrushoutfitters, and was told that you can get a hold of them at dylanrushoutfitters@gmail.com. I'll put a link below and I'll put it across the bottom of the screen as well. That's one way, but if you live in the Eugene, Springfield area, you can go over to Oregon Rod, Reel, and Tackle on North Coburg Road at the intersection of Game Farm and buy them in person. They sell them for 50 cents a piece. So a couple weeks ago, I went into Oregon Rod, Reel, and Tackle and I picked up a few more DRO beads, and this time I was smart enough to write the actual colors down. On Steelhead Lunatic, I had caught one, I believe it was on either the meth jelly or maybe even the Wizard Hex, but I couldn't remember for sure what the actual color is. But this time I just wrote it down on some of these little packages. Like these are actually some round beads. I got them in 12 and 14 Neo Peach. This meth jelly, I love the names by the way, DRO. I got some 12 and 14 in a hex. I had seen some people catching fish on the Kelly Sunrise. These are round, kind of peach color. Then we've got zombie droppings to keep it clean. Again, Wizard Hex. And I even picked up some ORRT for Oregon Rod Reel and Tackle Orange. Those looked kind of cool too. But this time I actually put them in these bags so that I could go get more if they ended up working out for me. So at the beginning of January, I spoke at my local chapter of Northwest Steelheaders about my bead fishing rig. And one of the guys brought up a really good question. He said, do you use 2 bead rigs at the same time? Now, I realized I didn't cover that in the original video. I have tried it in the past. I just think it's more convoluted than necessary. Oftentimes, I would reel in and my second bead would be hooked up somehow on my weighting system or on my first bead. Since I fish mostly in a fixed position, I felt like it was just more of a headache. And I was probably reducing my chances of hookups just by my rigs not being fishing correctly. So me personally, I just fish one. Now, if you're in a drift boat, it might be worth throwing out 2 beads. So what you would do is you would tie your second bead leader onto the shank of your first bead hook. Now, make sure to tie it with 2 loops. The very first time I hooked a fish using the 2 bead system, I was only using like a single loop and it broke my line almost immediately. So just make sure if you're going to try it, tie it with a good knot using a double loop. So just a tip regarding using dual bead rigs, when you cast, make sure to stop your line before it hits the water, and in theory that'll lay out those 2 bead rigs flat so they don't get tangled up quite as much. So another option for using multiple beads, I haven't personally used this, but David pointed it out to me, is just stacking 2 beads on the same leader. And all that's going to look like is 2 salmon eggs stuck together. You might even use different colors. I haven't used it myself, but it does seem like an interesting idea and it just might work. So another question that I received is why we peg our beads. Now, what was explained to me in my early days of bead fishing is the reason you peg beads is to avoid gill hooking wild fish. So if you have that bead right against the hook, there's a likelihood that it's going to hook the fish in the gills and that's going to kill them. So this is actually a bead rig I caught a steelhead this last weekend with, and you can see that's about a 2-inch peg. So I would say 1.5 to 2 inches above the hook shank, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to get them right in the corner of the mouth. But every once in a while, you may accidentally hook them on the outside. You know, you could just imagine this, the steelhead sucks it in, and when you go to set that hook, it gets hooked right in the corner on the outside. If you're in Oregon, that's an illegal hook set, so you would have to let that fish go if it's a hatchery fish. So the last question I had regarding float fishing with beads is about the Dave's Tangle Free weights in the 1/8 ounce size. Dakota had reached out and said that he wasn't able to find the 1/8 ounce size on Dave's site, so I suggested he reach out to Dave, and it sounds like Dave hooked him up with some 1/8 ounce weights. So I figured I would reach out to Dave and just find out if he was going to discontinue that size, and what he told me is just due to low sales he took them off, but he still had them in stock, and it sounds like he might put them back on there. But if not, he said even if he doesn't, he can make them to order, so you can get a hold of him either on his Facebook page or on Instagram, and he can get you some 1/8 ounce weights. Even though I use the 1/4 ounce or bigger the majority of time, I do like using the 1/8 ounce with an AF6 1/8 ounce float when the water's low and clear. So moving on to some questions about drift fishing. My viewer Tony Free asked if I pegged my corkies while I'm drift fishing, and I do not. In theory, the corky should slide up to the hook because they're buoyant. But if you want to peg your beads, you can use like a bead peg, like these right here from it's troutbeads.com. It's basically a tapered piece of rubber that you can push through the corky or like a hard bead, and then just trim off the edges and it'll hold the corky in place. Another thing that you can do is you can take round toothpicks and slightly put it in the hole of the corky when it's in the position you want it and just break off the toothpick. I personally don't like that. I just fear that that's going to weaken the line right where the toothpick is broke off. Now I should mention the double cross that I made in the drift fishing video. Those are naturally pegged because that yarn kind of holds that corky in place. But no, I do not peg my corkies, but you certainly can if you want to with those methods. So I had another viewer question from Tony Lutherford. Tony, I hope I pronounced your last name right, but you had asked whether you should use a sliding weighting system like I do drift fishing when you're bobber dogging. And I think it's unnecessary. It might even cause you more problems than necessary. So Tony also asked what size of shot I use for making my slinkies. Now I use 1/4 ounce Oregon tackle lead shot, and I use 300 to 330 slinky cord. The reason I use the bigger slinky cord is it's easier to get the lead shot inside, and they're a little bit more pliable. So something else I forgot to mention in the early video, when you're handling raw lead, make sure to wash your hands afterwards, because once lead enters your body, it's never going to leave, and it's not good for you. So the last thing I wanted to cover regarding drift fishing is the bite, and I know I didn't cover it real thoroughly in the first video, and I just wanted to say that if you're offering stops, especially if you're fishing just a corky, lift your rod tip ever so slightly. If you feel a head shake, set that hook. Those octopus hooks are a little thicker wire than like the small skein of bead hooks, so it takes a little bit more pressure to get those hooks set. So lastly, let's cover some questions regarding hardware, spinners, and spoons. My viewer Mario Romero asked about the availability of white matte silver blades for spinners, and he said he was having difficulty finding them. Well, I ran into the same exact problem this year, and they were unavailable on R&B and First Strike Lures websites. I contacted Sarah at Pentac, and she said that she didn't have them in stock and probably wasn't going to get them for a while. What she kind of explained to me is the material that they need to make those blades is in low supply, or they're having difficulty finding it, or at least the company that plates their lures is having difficulty finding it, so it might be a while before we can get that. But luckily for me, I had some old Pentac. These are 4.5s, which are about the size of like a First Strike or R&B number 4, and they're the matte silver blades. They're kind of tarnished up that I have cut off of old spinners, and so what she told me you could do is use Tarnex to clean these blades up. So I'm gonna rebuild some spinners using these old spinner blades. So I'm gonna do a video of refurbishing some spinners and spoons, and so watch for that video this season. Also, I should mention that I'm going to switch out all of my hooks on my spinners and spoons from trebles to singles. I actually found some really cool singles. I got these from Pentac. They're VMC tech sets, and they're a short shanked Siwash, and they're an offset hook. So these are size 1s. That's the size that I use with the size 4, 4.5, and then I ordered some 2s as well. So I'm going to be rebuilding all of my spinners and spoons using singles. I just think they're much better on the fish. So while I was at it, I went ahead and ordered some lure parts from Pentac. Pentac is what got me started in the game. I remember when I first started wanting to build spinners, I called and talked with Sarah, one of the owners of Pentac, and she told me everything I needed. And yeah, I've used some other parts over the years, but it was nice catching up with Sarah, and so I ordered some 24 karat gold number 4s and number 4.5s, and I ordered some black bodies in both the SX, which is the heavier one. I'm going to use those with the 4.5, and then in the SL, which is the lighter body, that I'm going to use with the size 4 spinner blades. But gold works really good when the water is really clear and it's sunny. Gold reflects just a little bit differently than polished brass, and I used to have a lot of luck with it. So I'm looking forward to tying more of those up and using those this weekend. So I have some sad news to report. So this book that I suggested you get regarding spoon fishing for steelhead by Bill Herzog, well, apparently it's no longer in print. So I reached out to Bill, and he said I was the 14th person to ask, and so it's probably my fault. I'm sorry, Bill. I was trying to help you out, but apparently it's no longer in print. Now, he suggested that you could go to eBay and potentially find some used copies, so check there. I just wish it was still in print. It's a great book. Another option is look on Amazon. Oftentimes they have used books. The one on there, last I looked, was 99 bucks. So I guess I better put that one in the old Cabela safe. So speaking of Bill Herzog, I just posted an article that he wrote on my Rage Fishing Facebook page about why he puts a swivel below his spoon and above his single hook. Now, he said that this is a trick that he learned from an old salmon troller, and the way that he described it is the salmon troller showed him that when you take your thumb and finger like this and you pull that spoon through, that hook always rotates and grabs the web of your hand right in the corner. And that's important for hookups because it's going to get the fish in the corner of the mouth. And Bill also noted that it reduces the amount of hookups through the eye and through the tongue, which is just better for the fish. So as a bonus, and to my surprise, my friend Richard T made a CAD diagram of how I build my steelhead spinners. If you want a copy of that, you can get it at Rage Fishing on Facebook or at Instagram on Steelhead Rage, and you could just save a copy of that to your phone. It's very detailed, and it has everything you'd want to know about how I build my spinners. So if I've missed anything, make sure to leave a question down in the comment field. And now it's time to get out there and catch some steelhead. I already got into some awesome fish this last week. I can't wait to share that footage with you. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.